This podcast is part of the Big Heads Media Podcast Network. Go to bigheadsmedia.com for more great podcasts.
Hello, and welcome to Body Count, a history podcast where we gab about death and disaster through the ages, highlighting figures, single events, time periods, whatever it may be that resulted in someone, or as is usually the case, a lot of someone's dying. I'm your host, Jessica Manor, joined as always by, and again, I never know what to call you when I do these things.
Twinkie.
Host Twinkie, joined by my Twinkie.
Sorry, Cara DiMuzio. And I had to make a joke because, my God, Jessica, that sounded like legitimately the most morose I've ever heard you. I don't know how else to describe that. So I'm here bringing the zest, so to speak, into this very depressing episode. And we
professional all the way. That's what people say. That lemon zest.
Lemon zest.
I thought it was clever, damn it.
It was.
I was actually thinking
Bring that pep. Bring that zest.
You're like the most delicious Mediterranean salad I've had this week. You are the peppercini in my brain right now.
Can you just call me a peppercini each time? I'd be okay with that.
I'm just going to say, and this is my peppercini. Oh, it's done now. It's done. That being said, we are joined by a guest that I am just blown away again, as always. I'm going to let him introduce himself by the amount of work he has done for us. And it's the thing that I am truly most excited about putting out.
I was going to say, Jessica, I think he's seriously brought it, and I respect all guests, but
Go hard or go home.
Thomas brought it. The cohesive narrative, he's going to have us crying. He's going to have us in Titanic mode. We're going to be jumping ship. And then we were listening to Titanic. Let me tell you, I learned there's a Gallipoli and a Titanic connection recently.
Is there?
There is, in fact. So the captain of the Carpathia, so what the ship that actually rescued the Titanic survivors in the search and rescue, actually would be a participant in the Gallipoli campaign, Arthur Rostron.
Yeah, that actually, now that you say that, that does slightly ring a bell.
So I was kind of like, well, that's a weird, crossover that we discovered when talking with the Outlandish historians. We were like, so everything's going to be on this whiteboard, and we're going to link it together. That just happened to easily come together.
By the end of this, I'm going to have a weird conspiracy theory board. But I have to say, of all our guests, and I have loved all of our guests, Thomas has gone the hardest in the paint. He came with it. He saw it. He's conquered it.
He came deep into history.
Oh, no, don't.
No, don't.
No.
You little peppercini. That being said, Thomas, God damn, this is a horrendous start. Thomas, tell us what you do, where you're at.
So kia ora, my name is Thomas. This will probably be, I think it's the 4th or the 5th now in the series. So for all of you at home, you've probably listened to these more or less back to back at this point. So you probably hopefully already know who I am, but for us, it's been 2 weeks. So if you don't know who I am, but at this point, I do the history. Oh, I'm the bloke behind the History of Aotearoa New Zealand podcast. So I do the same thing most other people do. I pick a country, and then I am going to talk about it, all about its history and that kind of stuff. And I just chose the one that I live in, which is New Zealand. So yes, that's who I am, and that's what I do. And of course, this is now as I said, the 5th, I think it is, episode on Gallipoli, which is a pretty major campaign in the New Zealand kind of story of World War One, and kind of is very important in the kind of overarching story of New Zealand and kind of how the modern New Zealand country, state, general psyche kind of develops. So it's a very important story, which is why I've tried to do it justice by doing way too much research. So
Nonsense! I won't hear it. It's been amazing.
Mr. Thomas went to Parliament too recently.
I did, yes, just to date the episode. Yeah, well, that was 2 weeks ago now. I went to Parliament to talk to the Clerk of the House about an interesting and kind of weird part of New Zealand history, which is the biscuit tin. So without getting too deep into it, the way that New Zealand works is if you want to introduce a bill to Parliament, one of the ways that you can do that, if you aren't in government, is you put forward a members' bill. And members' bills are chosen by ballot, right? It's basically like lottery. You pull a number out of a hat, or in our case, a biscuit tin, and you go, yep, sweet, that's the one we're going to talk about now. So there's this biscuit tin that is kind of like a little bit kind of famous in New Zealand politics. And this is the only thing that it's used for is pulling members' bills out. And it's kind of got the story behind it and that sort of thing. So I went to go talk to the Clerk of the House about what that was and how that process works and all that kind of stuff, which was very cool. Very excited that an actual important person let me into his office to talk about something.
I just like the idea that you showed up like a beach boy and wanted to know more.
Yeah, it kind of was like that. It was pretty funny. I made a bit of a fool of myself in front of parliamentary security. So that was pretty funny. Didn't really know what I was doing. Was extremely nervous.
They were like, "Oh shit, he's a problem."
Yeah, well, I went up and they go, "Oh, so who you here to see?" And I was like, "Oh, this lady from I guess she's from your social media team because I've been talking to her on Twitter." They're like, "Oh, okay." And the lady like comes over and she like explains it like, "Oh, here's what he's doing and all this stuff," and then they're like, "Oh, so you must be Emma then?" I'm like, "Oh, fuck yeah!" Like, I guess they don't know who all the people are, or whatever. So, yeah, kind of made a bit of a fool of myself in front of parliamentary security, but they were very nice, so that was fine. But yeah, that was quite cool. Walking around a very big, very old building. Still need to go find the pen. Actually, I want to go do the parliamentary tour because there's a pen in a glass case somewhere. That's the pen that the New Zealand Prime Minister used to sign the Treaty of Versailles, which is really, which is like pretty cool. I've told a few people about that actually, and it's really funny when you talk to people because it's like you talk to people like you guys, and they go, "Wow, that's really cool." And then I told like my brother, who was not a history guy, and he goes, "It's a fucking pen. Like, who cares?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, but." So yeah, and the biscuit tin was kind of the same. It's kind of just a biscuit tin, but the biscuit tin's allure kind of comes from the fact that it is just kind of an everyday household object and kind of has this really important job, and so it's really exciting yet extremely boring at the same time.
It's a cookie jar.
Yeah, which I found really fascinating. So yeah, they actually got it out for me, and because it normally sits in this like glass case, so I got into this guy's office and it was just sitting on his desk, and I was like, oh, So yeah, so I
ran off with it.
Oh yeah, I didn't touch it actually. I actually was a bit concerned. I had that, like when they say like with museums and stuff, like don't touch stuff. Had a bit of that going on, being like don't touch the.
Because you were like, what if an alarm had set off, kind of shit.
Yeah, yeah. But it was really funny. He just picks it up and opens it, and he's just like, yeah, it's just a bit of metal, basically. It's just quite funny. So yeah, it was just kind of like, well, why? Because I asked him like, why did you pick it? And he goes, well, we it probably because he wasn't around when it was bought. He was like, yeah, we probably just needed something that was kind of deep and you could pick something out. You couldn't see into it. And biscuit tin probably was the thing. So yeah, so that was pretty cool. I was very happy about that. They're very nice people, so hopefully I can go back down there at some point to talk about other stuff, like how the New Zealand Parliament building is never finished, and then they just slapped this other dumbass building next to it instead, and all sorts of other things.
Well,
So,
that means New
yeah.
Zealand is like the rest of the world in that regard.
Yeah. So, our parliamentary buildings are really dumb. It's really weird. To be fair, though, part of the reason why they are really dumb is because of this event. Is because I believe the building was being built at the time that World War One kicked off, and then they stopped building it because, of course, they were trying to concentrate on something else. So anyway, Gallipoli. Does anyone remember where we got up to?
We were up to, we had gone to another island. We'd had rest, I believe, for the first time in something like 2 straight months of just pure shit.
Yeah.
We were getting ready for another campaign of pure fucking shit.
Yeah, so last time Malone and the Wellington Battalion went to Cape Helles, which is just south of where kind of Gallipoli and Anzac Cove and all that is. So they went down there, did a bunch of stuff, and then came back. And they got Malone got some rest time, and then they went to Courtney's and Quinn's posts. So they did those up and, did his whole sanitation thing again and that kind of stuff. and then after at the end of their time at Quinn's, which was I believe it was about 2 months, if I remember correctly off the top of my head, this kind of plan was being thought up of how they can break the stalemate in Gallipoli, because it was at this point it was a stalemate. And the Allied commanders were kind of figuring that out. They started gradually figuring that out at this point. And so I left it on a bit of a cliffhanger last time by saying the Battle of Sari Bair was about to begin, which is what we're going to talk about today, or at least we're going to start it today. We may not get it finished today.
Yes.
So I do want to get slightly serious, just for a very brief second, in that if you are listening to this and you are easily distressed or in other way easily disturbed or anything like that, this will be some distressing content in this. I like to think that I'm a reasonably kind of stoic and kind of tough kind of guy. This genuinely disturbed me. So just a bit of a trigger warning, if you want to call it that. This could be some very distressing content for the next 1 to 2 episodes. Buckle in. It's gonna be rough.
Oh, great!
Listen to this, all of these back to back. I'm pretty sure the theme that you've gotten at this point has me constantly been going, "Oh, but wait, it's gonna get worse. This is the worst. This is the bit that I have been referring to this entire time. This is the awful bit. This is where shit gets fucking real." And that's saying something, considering what. Wait a minute.
Yeah, I was gonna say we've already come to hand-to-hand combat, killing each other with rocks. So it gets worse.
This is the climax of the Gallipoli campaign. Yeah.
What have you done to me, taking me on this journey, Thomas?
Yeah,
and I'm a tough person to scar, but here we go.
There we go. So as mentioned, by the end of June, it had become clear to the Allied commanders that Gallipoli was now in a bit of a stalemate. Birdwood, who, if we remember, was the leader of the New Zealands, had now re-put forth the idea for an offensive that would involve capturing the Sari Bair range, which was a big range of kind of hills and things, which would cut off Turkish communications and have Allied troops sweep across the peninsula, securing the Dardanelles and finally allowing the Navy to sail up the Sea of Marmara, to threaten Istanbul, as had been the intention in the first place. If you remember, the whole idea of this campaign was to secure the Dardanelles and allow the Navy, as well as the army, to rock on up to Istanbul, and threaten it, so that, in theory, they could knock out the Ottoman Empire. As we've mentioned in previous episodes, there was no indication to believe, or there was no reason to believe, that knocking or capturing Istanbul would knock the Ottomans out of the war and that they would surrender, but that's what they thought would happen. So that's what they were trying to do. So the New Zealand Infantry Brigade's part in the offensive would be to head north around the 6th of August to capture Chunuk Bair, Hill Q, and Hill 971, which were all part of the Sari Bair range. They would then attack south again to capture Battleship Hill and Baby 700. The Aussies would also be in support, attacking Baby 700 and the chessboard. Attacks would also be made at Lone Pine and Quinn's Post further to the south, as well as Hellas, with the intention of drawing some of the enemy away from the main assault. So this would effectively be a pincer move to push the Ottomans off the ridges and then off the peninsula. So for anyone who can't really follow what I just said, I do have a very nice infographic thing, which I will post to you guys on. It's a PDF. Please hold.
Thomas's customer service voice has
So that map that I've just sent you kind of shows you a vague idea of where we're looking. So to kind of give you that reference, Chunuk Bair is kind of at the middle, kind of lower middle, where that red line is, all those red arrows are. If you can follow that, if you guys have got it up. And that's where we're gonna follow. We're gonna follow the red line or the red arrows.
Okay.
So that's where we're kind of going to go. But just to give you an idea of what everything else was happening, this kind of gets split into two separate kind of columns, is what they call them. The left column and the right column. The left column is that kind of purple line that starts with number 3. And the right column is kind of made up of like 1 and 2, with them attacking things like Tabletop and that kind of area. As well as areas down the south. So you can kind of see the idea of what they were trying to do was they were going to go up this valley past Tabletop and the Apex, which was along Rhododendron Spur. They were going to then attack Chunuk Bair, capture it, and then sweep down Battleship Hill and Baby 700, which would be also being attacked by, I believe it was the Australians. Yes, the Australians who would be attacking from the other side, trying to support that. So that was the basic idea that they were trying to do. So the idea was that they were basically going to have a bunch of guys all come up at various points, sweep along the whole ridge itself, and then that would push them off, or push the Ottomans off, if that makes sense. It's quite complicated, but...
Not so much that, because this just has a massive potential to go horribly wrong.
Exactly. So they expected to face 100,000 Ottoman troops in total, 27,000 of which would be against the Anzacs and 37,000 of which would be in reserve. Recon suggested that although the trench fighting would be tough, Jacko's morale was wavering and ammo was low. We've seen this before and we know how that goes. So
yeah.
And for Ataturk's part, who was the kind of commander of the opposite side, he actually knew that this attack was coming, or he knew an attack was coming. He just didn't know where from. He thought the Anzacs would attack up the undefended valleys to the north of Sari Bair and attack from that direction, which actually is basically what they were planning to do and is what they ended up doing, was basically going up these valleys to hit the actual Sari Bair range. So the idea would be that a couple of covering forces consisting of a mounted brigade, some British troops, and the Māori contingent would capture positions in the foothills to allow the 2 infantry columns to head up the valleys in relative safety to the main ridge. So again, that's that left and that right column. So these 2 columns would attack from 2 different directions. The right column would be made up of the NZIB under Johnston and would attack Chunuk Bair. And the brigade would also be split in 2, with the Wellingtons and Otargos heading up a valley called Chilak Deer. I think I've pronounced that correctly. And the Canterburys would head up Sulzy Deer, the same valley Ataturk predicted the attack would come from. So he had actually fortified that position quite a lot. The left column would be made up of the 29th Indian Brigade and the 4th Australian Brigade. So yeah, you've got those two columns, and there's kind of two smaller columns within the right. So that's where we're going to kind of focus on a bit more. For perhaps the first time, we find that Malone feels the Wellingtons are actually not fit for the task. He comments that his men are basically overworked and have already had to carry much stress and strain, that this new heavy load would be too much for them. He really just thought that they'd been really just hammered too much or already so far, and that this was just going to tip them over the edge. He adds that this would involve a night operation in rough country, something that they had not trained for, saying, quote, "We shall possibly mistake the Maoris for Turks, and the confusion in the dark will be terrible," end quote. Which is, yeah, a little bit racist.
Yep. Well, there he is. Good. Okay.
Yeah, there it is.
Being himself. There it is.
Yeah. So but the kind of thing about this was, well, not that particular comment, but in general, Malone's concerns were not necessarily unfounded. The Canterburys and Otago's had been given a brief rest on Lemnos, whereas the Wellingtons would go pretty much from Quinn's Post into the trenches for this offensive. And if you remember from last time, they were quite thoroughly hammered at Quinn's, just trying to fortify the position, as well as defend it as well. So Malone ideally wanted them to have a long rest like the British 29th Division had also been given. And not only that, the NZIB's initial strength of 4,000 men was now down to about 2,800 from a combination of disease, dysentery, and being smashed at the landings and Hellas, as well as being overworked at Courtney's and Quinn's. So they'd lost nearly half of their men in the entire brigade already.
God.
The Wellingtons in particular had terrible food, a lack of water, heavy workload, and basically had seen non-stop action since the landings. And now they would be involved in the last big offensive in Gallipoli without the opportunity to lie down and have a cuppa, which is pretty rough.
God.
Yeah.
These poor guys, they got hit hard.
The Wellingtons in particular have had it really bad. And interestingly enough, Birdwood agreed with Malone in that the NZIB should be rested, saying that they had been, quote, much knocked about, end quote. Johnston, however, disagreed and insisted the brigade be used for what would become the toughest part of the battle. So, there's that. Malone chastised Johnston in his diary for not knowing the weakness in his men. And Malone also thought that Johnston's preparations for the attack were not good enough, mostly because Johnston thought the whole thing would be a walk in the park, apparently saying it would be like, quote, kissing one's hand, end quote, and claiming that should there be any issues, he would ride up and get right in there himself. And that, to me, sounds like a guy that has not been paying attention for the last, 3 months they've been there.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's a good 3 months of having your head firmly planted up your ass, is what that sounds like to me.
Yeah, exactly. He sounds like he hasn't really been concentrating or even, knowing what's going on right now.
Also, probably has quite clearly has not learned a single thing about Malone, because if he says, I don't know, it's an I don't know. Okay. I just it's a fucking toss up. I don't think they're ready, but whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And Malone wrote of this as well, saying, quote, "If it were not so serious, it would be laughable. So far as I'm concerned, So far as I am concerned, the men, my brave, gallant men, shall have the best fighting chance I can give them, or that can be got. No airy plunging and disregard for the rules and chances," end quote. So even there, Malone is implying that he will disregard orders if he thinks they're bad, because he wants to make sure his men come out the other side, basically.
Malone, this guy. It says something slightly racist that I go, I don't love, but also turn around. But also, I'm going to tell this guy basically to fuck off if it comes between, my guys surviving. I just don't give a shit. Call me up later. He's just an up and down with this guy.
Yeah, it's a real roller coaster.
Yeah. It is a real emotional
He's
roller
the one that's
coaster.
been practicing at home, like freaking sleeping in a bunk.
Yeah.
I mean, he was ready for this in theory. Again, in theory.
In theory,
I'm also shocked to see there's something that he hadn't at least trained for a little bit, like rough country at night. I figured that would have been tick number 1.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, I guess they never got round to that bit or something. I don't know. So yeah. And as kind of all of this was occurring, the preparations for the battle, which is also known as the August Offensive. So if anyone is like, Battle of Sari Bear, I don't know what the fuck that is. It's also called the August Offensive, which you may have heard it been called that as well. So as the preparations for the battle were kind of getting into they were getting into full swing. 30,000 troops had been brought on shore at night and hidden in ravines. Huge dumps of ammo, food, and other supplies were also made. And on the 3rd of August, Birdwood and Godley set out their instructions. All ranks were to wear white armlets and white patches on their backs so that friendlies could be identified. All men were to carry semaphore flags to show the position of their units to the navy, artillery, and other troops. Bayonets fixed, but rifles not loaded. Wounded were not to be evacuated when it was dark until the columns had gone past. All movement was to be silent as possible, and if they came under fire as they approached their objective, they were to ignore it and move on. Snipers and the like would be dealt with by advanced parties or special units set up for that job. It was also imperative that they were accurate in their timing, as many attacks were actually timed in such a way to provide mutual support and protection. So a lot of them were trying to attack one hill from like 2 different sides, or trying to draw fire away. So that was things like Quinn's Post. Quinn's Post wasn't really meant to act as an actual place where they thought they were going to gain ground. It was just meant to distract the Ottomans to try and funnel some of their forces into a different direction to make it slightly easier for the ones that they actually thought were going to do some actual ground making. So yeah, so the timing was very, very important. However, battalion commanders were also instructed to push on to their objectives regardless of what was going on with the other columns. Instead, they were to take as much as they could and hold that ground and make it invincible to counterattack. Which is, yeah, not great when you've literally just told them it's imperative you get to places on time and that kind of stuff. Because as we're going to see, some of this does happen where some guys don't manage to make it to some of these key places, whilst other guys are drastically trying to push to get to their position, and it just doesn't work because they get to their position, the other side doesn't, and the whole plan just falls apart basically.
And so they're going to get all fired. Oh my God, this is not going to be pretty. Oh, Thomas, what have you done to me? Okay.
Yeah, and if all of this wasn't enough, the troops were instructed to conserve food, water, and ammo supplies as supplies would be slow to reach them. They were expecting that this was going to be long, hard, and grueling. In some cases, water wouldn't be able to get to them for at least 18 hours and food for 48 hours. They were expecting that their men were going to go without food or go without a resupply of food for 2 days. That's how long, at least, they were thinking that this was going to go on for. And it was expected that the first 2 nights would likely be pretty sleepless and that they would expect heavy fire from the Turks come daylight. However, the commanders were relying on the naval bombardment to counteract that. So they were hoping that the Navy was actually just going to smash them so hard that hopefully it just kind of made things better, basically. And this plan was not actually awful in a general sense. If you remember, Malone actually had come up with this plan himself when he was in Hellas. He had more or less come up with a plan very similar to this as a way to break the stalemate in Gallipoli. So the actual plan itself wasn't an awful idea, and it's probably the most innovative idea that any Allied commander at Gallipoli had for a while. But the problem with it was that it required a lot of coordination as well as very good navigation and timing, and that's where it's all going to fall apart.
Right. If you'd have been less ambitious, maybe, in how ground was gained, or perhaps chosen another spot based on this map, or, one where the enemy didn't absolutely anticipate that you were probably going to choose.
Yeah, exactly. And the other part of this as well is that this whole plan is a hard enough task on its own. Right. Even harder when the men required to do it are weakened due to months of combat and disease. The NZIB, in terms of pure numbers of the amount of people in it, is almost half strength. And so it's just... if
you struggle to go to the grocery store with Lyme disease, imagine all the diseases you've got by this point, like poor hygiene, malnourished, you've just been fighting, you've got legit exhaustion. It's now go take this fucking impossible position. I cannot imagine. I don't think I'm I can't imagine. I can't imagine looking all that in the face and being like, well, all right, today's the day. Just fuck off. Fuck off. Right?
just fuck off.
You know what?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Prison is preferable. Come on.
Yeah. It might be.
I'd rather be shot just and get it over with instead of do it here.
Yeah, exactly. And so Hamilton was actually somewhat realistic about the plan, writing that the Anzacs had been asked to perform one of the most difficult military operations in history, saying, quote, "A night march and assault by several columns in intricate mountainous country, strongly entrenched and held by a numerous and determined enemy," end quote. So he knew potentially, or at least in part, what they were about to do. Most difficult military operation in history. I don't know if that might be overselling it, but he was pretty fucking close, I feel.
Didn't miss the mark too much.
Yeah, I think an argument can probably be made for a few other operations, but he was not. I think he was pretty close. So, as Malone was, of course, wont to do, he wrote a letter to Ida, his wife, talking about what was to come. Quote, "We're in for a big move and everything promises to go well. The attack starts tomorrow night. You will have heard all about it long before you get this. I do know all your feelings and I reciprocate them, but do not be sad. All will be well and our future life together will all be all the sweeter and better for this separation. My candle is all but burnt out and we shall be soon moving. So good night, dearest one, your lover and husband, Malone." End quote. This would be Malone's last letter to his wife.
Oh, fuck you, Thomas. Oh, I knew that was coming. Damn it. Okay. As soon as you said, and he wrote a letter to Ida. God damn it.
So
meanwhile, I know
that's
happy, but he'll have penned something super depressing about how he has no hope in his journal at this point, I'm sure, as well. God.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So on the 5th of August, the Wellington Battalion was relieved at Quinn's Post and headed to a valley on the northern side of Walker's Ridge. Here they stayed hidden in the scrub all day and even were ordered not to look up in case a Turkish scouting plane flew over and they were able to see their face. That night, Johnston issued orders for what was to follow. The Otago, Wellington, and Auckland battalions would move along Chilek Deer and up onto Rhododendron Ridge in that order, followed by a company of engineers and the 26th Indian Mountain Battery, which was an artillery unit. The Otagos would secure Rhododendron and the Wellingtons would follow and fortify it, in particular placing pickets, which are essentially sentries to warn of enemy advance, on a section called Cheshire Ridge overlooking Igel Deer, which was the valley that the left column would be advancing up. So they were trying to secure some basically positions to try and help the other team, if you will.
Mhm.
At the same time, the Canterbury Battalion would secure Salzie on the southern end of Rhododendron Ridge towards Battleship Hill. The Otargos and Wellingtons would then push on and capture Chunuk Bair. That was the theory, that was the plan. As we will see, it all goes to shit.
Somebody didn't make it on time, or this
Somebody
would be
didn't
a
make it on
happier story.
So this was
Okay.
all well and good in theory, but the start of the attacks had not gone well. The Mounted Brigade and the Māori contingent, who had been sent to capture the foothills kind of ahead of the two main columns, were delayed almost immediately by a well-defended barricade at the opening of Chiluk Deer. This was only cleared after some vicious hand-to-hand combat. Again, we've got that as well.
Mhm.
The Wellingtons were meant to begin marching at 11. Oh, sorry, no, I've skipped ahead a bit there. Small parties of Turks were then fired on the Otargos as they began advancing, which were creating confusion among the Otargos. The Wellingtons were meant to begin marching at 11 p.m., but it wasn't until well after 12 a.m. that they did so, with Malone at their head. They were additionally slowed as the terrain became steeper and more difficult, as well as the fact that they were, in pitch darkness. And Malone started to get a bit antsy as he knew that as soon as daylight hit, their element of surprise was gone. That's probably the other bit that I actually haven't mentioned that this entire attack really heavily relied on, was the element of surprise, which, as we kind of mentioned, Aotearoa was actually kind of aware that something was coming, so they kind of didn't have it as much as they perhaps thought they did, but they were at least hoping that they could get a lot closer before the Turks realized what was going on, and then they had to basically do the same advance whilst being shot at.
And I'll also remind everybody from our last episodes, Aotearoa didn't care what he had to throw at a problem. He did not give a shit about life and limb.
Again, the Ottomans lost a lot more, or had a lot more casualties than any of the Allied side, basically, during this entire campaign. He was, arguably worse in some ways.
Basically, to this point, if you want it, you better go hard to come and get it, because I don't give a shit. Basically, on the other side.
As we've kind
Just
of mentioned
a reminder.
In other episodes, we've kind of mentioned, the Ottomans were defending their home, and that is a huge mental kind of a huge extra mental level to that. If you think, if you have that kind of idea that you're defending your home and that kind of stuff. So Johnston ordered Malone to advance through the chaotic Otargos and head to Rhododendron Ridge. They reached a section called the Apex, which is about 300 meters below the ridge, and halted there at daybreak. For reference, the Wellingtons should have been within assaulting distance of Chunuk Bair 2 hours earlier. They are well behind schedule. And timing, as we have mentioned, is extremely important for this attack.
And not just a little bit behind, not we'll be there in 10 type behind, significant, oh shit. Yeah. Okay.
So Malone sent a message to Johnston informing him that he had stopped since it was now day, and that he would secure his position and do some recon to ensure the best path forward. Things were now starting to turn to custard, more so than they already had. The element of surprise had been lost due to the daylight. The Otargos were scattered among the ridges, and the summit of Chunuk Bair was occupied by Turkish scouts, who could be seen silhouetted against the rising sun. Still, the Wellingtons secured their position. The thing to note about the Apex is this part of the it's just below Chunuk Bair. Chunuk Bair has a very good line of sight onto this kind of region. So they're looking at a very literally uphill battle to try and get to Chunuk Bair. And so the Auckland Battalion then arrived along with a party of Gurkhas who had some navigation issues along with another commander by the name of Temperley, who's going to kind of, I'm not sure if we've talked about him yet, but he is going to come up again. So Temperley urged Malone to press on, but Malone argued that they needed to secure their current gains, especially as it was now day, they could no longer surprise the enemy. The Canterburys had also had some navigation issues during the night, getting lost and doubling back to Anzac Cove. So they were well behind schedule as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Literally, like, back to where we start. Okay.
Yeah. So they actually went the wrong way, I believe, and then had to go back to Anzac Cove and start again. Yeah. So elsewhere in the left column, things were also turning bad. The Indians were now dug in below the crest of Hill 971, and the Aussie attack on Hill Q had failed totally, as had the diversionary attacks on Baby 700 and from Quinn's Post and Pope's Hill. At Lone Pine, the Aussies were in a... Yeah, so at Lone Pine, the Aussies were in a fight for survival. North in Solva Bay, 20,000 men had landed safely, but had not yet advanced much past the beach. So
Jesus!
were not moving.
God.
At the neck, just southwest of Baby 700, over 370 Aussie officers and men had been wounded or killed in 4 charges against the Turkish line. This was over half the men sent to the neck. What made this worse was that this attack was meant to support the Kiwi attack on Chunuk Bair, an attack that hadn't even started yet. They've already lost half their men, or more than half. Yeah.
Okay.
It's going very badly.
Fuck. Okay.
At about 8 a.m., Johnston turned up to Malone's position and had a chat with Temperley. Temperley was actually in, I think Temperley was in Johnston's kind of crew. You know, that Temperley was his man, basically. So Johnston came up to have a chat with Temperley, Malone, and Young, who was the commander of the Otago's, while the exhausted men had a bit of a rest and a bit of a feed. They all agreed that an attack on Chunuk Bair was now out of the question, at least for now. At this point, Chunuk Bair had likely been reinforced with snipers and machine guns, which they'd already started receiving fire from, causing some casualties for them. In terms of reinforcement, the Canterburys were a long way off due to having to go back to Anzac Cove, and the 29th Indian and the 4th Australian Brigades just didn't seem to be anywhere. They had no idea where they were at this point. As such, Johnston ordered them to wait until reinforcements arrived to secure their left and right flank, as an unsupported attack now would fail. So Temperley sent this back to HQ to let them know what they were doing, just to say, hey guys, maybe tell some of the other guys not to advance or whatever, because we're not going to, because we think it's a really bad idea. The reply that they got from Godley was, quote, attack at once, end quote.
Fuck him and his human material. Like, oh my God, no.
Yeah.
This is going to be horrible.
This is arguably, I mean, coming from my very armchair, kind of general position here, this is arguably one of the key decisions that was made in this entire attack. This decision to override Johnston's judgment. And in fact, Temperley apparently begged Johnston to disobey the order, saying that Johnston had a much better judgment of the situation since he was actually here, and Godley would come to the same conclusion that he did had he been here.
I think we can be armchair generals because Godley's certainly being one right now. So I think, all's fair at this point.
True. So Temperley is maybe literally on his knees begging Johnston to disobey this order, because he knows that this is going to be a horrific slaughter if they do attack Chunuk Bair, which is literally an uphill battle in broad daylight, where basically the Turks can already basically see them. Johnston refused to disobey the order.
Damn it.
Saying,
no.
Somebody else said, quote, all his traditions and training and innate loyalty were against it. Besides, it was a heavy responsibility to take, end quote. So he just had an innate, it was just deep in his
Right.
core.
He's a military man.
Yeah, you've been given an order, you follow it. But also when he says, besides, it was a heavy responsibility to take, I think what he was essentially meaning there is that Johnston was not up to potentially be court-martialed and executed, which is potentially what this would have resulted in had he done so. Godley could have had him arrested and killed.
Right. He's not taking the potential of actually falling on the sword. That's somebody else's job,
Yeah, exactly. And it's as kind of
it.
as much as I deplore this kind of action that he's done, it is hard to argue with that.
If you're looking down the barrel of it, I get that.
I understand that. Yeah. So as this kind of discussion is going on, the Ottomans were being reinforced by Ataturk's division, and the enemy fire grew heavier on the Anzacs. And at this point, it's about 9 a.m.
God damn it. And
so
just
now,
a reminder, Ataturk goes hard in the paint, guys. This is going to be like I can't stress enough what we're looking down the barrel of here, literally.
Yeah. So a new message now arrived from Godley's HQ. The Aucklands and Gurkhas were to attack at 10:30 a.m. with the support from naval guns and field artillery. However, recon showed that the area they would need to pass through would be so narrow that they would need to attack by the platoon under heavy fire, which is not very good at all. It's basically that idea from 300 where he's like, we've got this small little bit that we can defend, and therefore that negates the large amount of soldiers that the Persians had. This is effectively the same thing, right? If you can't have loads of men all attacking at once, that becomes a bit of a problem. Your numbers don't really mean as much.
The bottleneck effect.
Yeah. So the Auckland Battalion commander recommended that the attack be delayed until nightfall to give his men a better chance. So again, we've got someone else saying, maybe we should wait. Johnston insisted that it be conducted as per Godley's orders. The brigade's machine gun officer, Captain Jesse Wallingford, then urged Johnston to delay the attack by just 30 minutes so he could get his men into place to give the Aucklands some half-decent cover fire. Again, Johnston refused. The attack went ahead as scheduled, and it was a fucking massacre. 2 Turkish battalions now defended the ridge, and they killed or wounded over 300 men in 10 minutes.
Holy fuck. Oh my God. Oh, no.
What did the Anzacs gain for that 300 men that they lost in 10 minutes? 100 meters of ground. Which is not a lot at all.
God.
This was also similar to the Aussie slaughter at the Neck, which had happened about 5 hours earlier. Apparently, Johnston cheered his men on until dragged into cover fire by his staff. The officer sent to take his place, being shot dead not long after that. It is possible that Johnston was drunk during this incident. Which
Fuck
is something
him.
that
I'll just shoot him myself. He doesn't have to be court-martialed.
Yeah, I don't know if I mentioned this, but something that I'll talk about a bit later when we kind of wrap things up with Johnston is that he was a drunkard. He was potentially drunk for most of the campaign. Which
good.
potentially probably explains a lot of his decisions.
Great. Yeah. Like saying, we're just going to go ahead and do it. Yeah. Fuck.
So this attack effectively put the Aucklands out of commission. That is 1/4 of the New Zealand Infantry Brigade effectively wiped. By now, the Otago and Canterbury battalions had closed on the Wellington position and were ordered to proceed to the apex. Instead of trickling his men in, the Canterbury commander, Lieutenant Colonel Hughes, basically just sent the whole fucking unit onto the spur that was fully exposed to Chunuk Bair. Every Turkish gun in sight fired on the Canterburies, and, quote, within a few minutes, it had effectively ceased to exist, end quote. It there being the Canterbury Battalion. Despite the fact that not only was it agreed that progress in daylight was impossible, and that this had now been effectively proven after almost 2 entire battalions had been wiped out, Johnston still insisted that Godley's orders be followed and that the Wellingtons, along with the remains of the Canterburies, continue the assault. Malone, for his part, outright refused, saying it would be suicide. Again, it's already been proven that that was the case. A soldier by the name of Charlie Clark was near Malone when Johnston gave the order. Quote, stop where you are, Colonel Malone told us. He was very stern and strong-faced. Malone told the British commanders, no, we are not taking orders from you people. Wellington is not going up there. My men are not going to commit suicide. I will take all risk and any punishment. You will take Chunuk tonight, in the dark, not in daylight. These 2 Englishmen threatened to arrest Malone for insubordination. I reckon if they tried to arrest him, we would have shot them. Malone just ordered, Wellington Battalion, come back from the ridge. So we did. We were all grateful and we thanked him. End quote.
Oh my God, fuck you, Thomas. You almost got tears. Oh.
So Malone is starting to really push back against the British commanders. He is really, this is make or break, basically, and he realizes it. So he's not taking any chances. And again, I mean, it doesn't really take a fucking rocket scientist to know that it's a bad idea. Again, he's literally just seen or just heard of 2 entire battalions get wiped out because they tried to do virtually what he'd just been ordered to do as well. So he knew what was going to happen.
You don't have to be fucking Augustus Caesar to figure out that's not a good idea. But also, just like, good for him. He's done the thing that nobody else has, like, the nutsack in the story to do on the ground and be like, fuck you. If it's like me or my men, come and get me.
Yeah, exactly. So for whatever reason, Johnston didn't arrest Malone. So instead, he reported to Godley that the attack on Chunuk had failed, recommending that further attack be delayed until nightfall. Godley, finally, thank fuck, agreed to
Thank God.
Along with some adjustments to the original plan. What this meant for the NZIB is that they would be reinforced by 2 inexperienced battalions, the 7th Gloucesters and the 8th Welsh Pioneers. Given the state of the other 3 battalions in the NZIB, the Wellingtons would be expected to lead the attack.
No. Okay. God.
That night, the Kiwis buried their dead as stretchers carried the injured downhill as Turkish machine guns fired near constantly. At 1 a.m., Johnston issued orders for the attack on Chunuk. The attack would begin at 4:15 a.m., preceded by 45 minutes of shelling. The lead companies would leave the apex at 4 a.m., meaning they had 15 minutes to reach the ridge before the covering fire of the shelling stopped.
Can we stop timing these things so fucking close?
Yeah.
No.
Nope,
of course not. Good. Great. Because it's worked so fucking well so far.
Yeah. So Malone, prudent as ever, knew there would be heavy fighting that day and his men were low on water and ammo. So he asked for more from the brigade HQ. A party was also sent to the beach to see what they could do. At 3:30 a.m., Malone woke his men and formed them up in the moonlight. Malone gave his batman, which is like his second guy and that sort of thing. He gave his batman, Ben Smart, Ida's address to send a letter to in case he was killed and sent him on his way. Malone apparently turned to one soldier who he had butted heads with in Egypt, telling him, quote, "Before we go forward, I want you to know that I hold nothing against you over what happened in Egypt. I like a man that tells me the truth. End quote. To the rest of the men, Malone added, quote, I do not think I shall survive the day, but I feel my work is done, for I command the best battalion that has left New Zealand. End quote.
Oh, piss off, Thomas. That one got me. Oh, this guy.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
I'm also
British
prepping
Navy,
myself. This is going to get rough.
This is, yeah.
Oh.
As the British Navy and Anzac artillery absolutely leveled the summit of Chunuk Bair, Malone's exhausted and rather gaunt men waited for the order to advance, possibly supported by Malone's calm demeanour. At 4 a.m., the Wellingtons fixed bayonets and moved through the most frontal positions currently occupied by the Aucklands and onto a steep saddle that connected the apex to Chunuk Bair. Malone still wasn't sure where he would put the trenches once the ridge had been captured, either on the front or rear side. His advisors suggested doing both and connecting them via a tunnel in the middle. As they crested the hill that they were on, they expected to meet the same heavy fire that annihilated the Aucklands. But it never came, and the men in front overran a small Turkish trench and then moved over the top of Chunuk Bair and down the other side. They found the Turkish position more or less deserted, and not a single shot was fired in its capture. They weren't sure if the Ottomans had fled due to the shelling, or had been pulled back by mistake, or it was some kind of trap. Whatever the case, the men got a small taste of victory, being able to see the opposite coast in the distance.
Fuck. Oh.
Interestingly, Hamilton could see the attack from his position in Anzac Cove and watched it as it commenced. At first, they weren't sure who the figures climbing over Chunuk Bair belonged to, but as the sun rose and it grew brighter, they realized that they were coming from the Anzac side and that the attack had been successful. It was now a tough choice for Malone. Should he follow his orders to hold the crest and attack the enemy's rear towards the south, or dig in and hold his position? Malone assessed the situation, and he knew that there would be Turks in sizable force somewhere nearby, since they weren't here and they were yesterday.
They're somewhere, and if it's a trap, you don't want to. Okay.
Exactly.
Clever. Okay.
Plus, if he did push on, there was no other battalion that could come in behind and secure Chunuk Bair. The Aucklands and Canterburys were basically destroyed at this point, and the Otagos were being reorganised from the chaos that had occurred the day before. And the Aussies and Indians, fuck knows where they were. They were still missing.
Yeah, okay.
Given all this, Malone decided to hold and dig in.
Yeah.
And this would actually be no easy task. The ground was rock. It was basically all rocks, and it was very, very hard, making it difficult to dig trenches. And the position was open to fire from both flanks, which was probably covered in a fog at this point, which is basically the only reason that they weren't being shot at the moment. Malone decided to deploy 2 companies to man the main Turkish trench that they had captured, and the other 2 to dig a smaller trench on the seaward side, so the side that was facing, I think, towards Anzac, I believe. Mm-hmm. Behind the crest to link the 2 via a tunnel. Yeah.
Okay.
So the first of the Gloucestershires and the Welsh pioneers also arrived and were deployed to help along with men to scout the area and provide warning of a Turkish advance if it came. Malone seemed to have known how precarious their position was and pushed his men to work hard. Quote, Colonel Malone told everyone to dig and keep on at them, telling them that before nightfall they would want it, and he proved very correct. Even the officers dug with our small entrenching tools. End quote. With everyone pitching in, it seems that they were all on the same page. Their survival would depend on their efforts in the next few hours. They may not have been explicitly aware, but one of the most savage infantry battles of the entirety of the Great War was about to begin. The Battle of Chunuk Bair.
Oh,
And that's where I think we should end it.
I
Makes sense.
keep looking for light at the end of this tunnel. And I know
No.
there isn't any.
Not
I
gonna
know
happen.
I
Yeah.
know it's not. I know.
It is not coming. So when I say the worst bit is coming, the Battle of Chunuk Bair is really what I meant more specifically. It is brutal. The Battle of Chunuk Bair. It is just insane.
Think about that. Think about how fucking exhausted you already are. And now you've got to dig trenches for your life. You've got to dig a tunnel between them. Everybody's going crazy. How hard it is to dig. I don't know if anybody's dug a legitimate hole in their life listening, but it's tough. Now imagine doing it through
the other thing,
rocks.
Yeah, the other part of this is to kind of keep in mind that they're not just using you get a huge spade and it's actually
Right.
It can be reasonably straightforward. What they were using is these things that were small. It was like a small pickaxe with like a tiny shovel on the end. It's
can
not very big.
fit in a pack, attached to a pack, so you can carry it.
Yeah, so it's a kind of it's like a one-handed, like 1.5-handed type of tool, right? It's not very big at all. And you're expected to, along with 50 other dudes or whatever, you're expected to build this trench. And again, it seems very likely that at least Malone, if not literally everyone, because even the officers were doing it, which is not something that they normally would do, they seem to have been aware really what was about to happen, that if they did a shit job, they were going to die, and that was why. That was the reason why. So they knew that if they didn't dig this trench, digging this trench could very much be the difference between whether they live or die and whether they hold this position.
I think it's just good sense knowing what you faced in the previous days and that these guys, again, are not messing around. So if they are not immediately in sight, they are coming sooner or later. Like, it's coming, especially if,
yeah, so
especially if you don't have somebody immediately behind you. Shit's about to get rough.
Yeah, the other kind of part of this, the kind of other sad part of this, which is kind of jumping forward a little bit, we'll talk a bit more about it next time. This is arguably the most criticized decision that Malone makes in the future, not just by his contemporaries, but also by military historians in the next sort of 10 to 15, 20 years, as well as historians basically almost right up until I think it's like the 80s. Basically, everyone criticizes him for this decision to build a trench and connect it with a tunnel. They think he should have, I can't quite remember, but they think he should have done something else. And it was only until fairly recently that that a historian basically came out and said, actually, this was actually a pretty good idea, and this was basically the only option he had. So it's kind of the sadder part that this is one of the really key decisions that Malone makes that really tarnishes his name in the future and his family's name in the future. His family actually have a really tough time because his name gets really tarnished kind of because of not just this decision, but generally just how he conducts himself in this whole thing. He's again, it's a bit of spoilers, but he effectively becomes the fall guy for the failure of this entire offensive. Which is really unfortunate because he seems, he's one of the only ones that seems to have actually been making any sense. Although, as we did see earlier, other guys were starting to be like, holy shit, like maybe we shouldn't attack a whole hill during when it's full daylight,
Right. But I think, again, spoilers for next time. We all know where I'm going to fall on this. I'm going to defend this guy to the ends of the earth. Not because I'm saying he's the only one that gives a shit. Like, these are not human. These people aren't human fodder. This is not so much human material. Again, see our previous episodes if you want to know why I'm so offended by that particular turn of phrase.
I mean, there's a lot of statistics, I've been throwing around of 300 men dying or whatever and that kind of stuff. And it is difficult to try to conceptualize that in terms of anything other than just sheer bodies. But it's a lot of people. It's a lot of people that expected to come back, expected to go on adventure, do something fun for a while, and then come back. And they got thrown into this thing basically because somebody thought that they were human material, as you say.
It was 10 minutes, correct?
10 minutes. They lost over 300 men in 10 minutes. So
but whole battalions, it's hard to imagine too, just like, the number of bodies dropped. It just boggles the mind.
The kind of thing that, like, for people that find this difficult to kind of conceptualize and kind of visualize is 300 is roughly probably like your average lecture theater, like decently sized lecture theater. I'd say most people would know what that kind of looks like, or probably like a stage theater. You go watch like Swan Lake or some shit. That's probably roughly about 300 people. Imagine that amount of people, bam, gone, 10 minutes. It's a lot of people in not a lot amount of time. And again, the other aspect, of course, of this is the kind of age range we're talking here is probably anywhere between kind of 18 to probably 25-ish.
Yeah.
Is probably the majority of what these people were. So, I'm only 26. That's younger than me.
We've established, like, again, Malone's the old guy here. He's the really significantly he's old 56. Guy on the block. And he's not an old guy, So in today's terms, he's not an old guy. So that is so hard to wrap your head around. It boggles the mind. And again, everybody knows I am far from a military historian. Usually I sweep over this in general terms. So it's just like such a, this is rough to actually look at it, look in the face of it, and see the cost in, like you said, an actual theater of people in 10 minutes. Yeah. But I'm really glad you established in the previous episodes just that this is not the Ottomans that they really thought they were going to face, because it's if you want it, come and get it kind of thing. Like, you better be fucking prepared.
It's one of the interesting things that I didn't really look into was they're getting all this recon saying the Ottomans are low morale, low ammo, they're deserting constantly, and all that kind of stuff. And of course, that just seems to be entirely not true. Or if it is, it does not seem to be slowing them down. So I think one of the interesting things that, if I was going to do this again, or if I look into it in the future, would be, why were they getting all these reports that, that all these things were happening, and then basically the Ottomans were on the cusp of breaking, when clearly that was just absolutely not the case.
Thomas, the exact question that has haunted me since we began this, and something that I mean to find out, because I really want to know where this is. It just an assumption? I mean, did we even bother? Was there any attempt at true intel here? You know what I'm saying? Because there does not seem to be, because they seem to be set up on the other side of the river, Eowyn style, Lord of the Rings. Like, if you want it, come and claim it, like, they are rocking and ready to go.
Yeah.
And don't care about loss of life. It's not that the Allies particularly do either, as you've just seen, but I mean, particularly
the scale of the Ottomans was just so much more, for every man that the Allies lost, the Ottomans were losing 10 or more.
And yet it keep
still
coming.
Slow them down. To stop them. Again, I didn't look at the Ottoman side all that much. So that could just be possibly because, of course, the Ottomans had their supply lines open. In theory, they could just march all the way back to Constantinople, or march back to Istanbul, and get more soldiers. That was a possibility for them. So it could have just been that they were actually just being reinforced. Whereas, of course, it was much harder for the Allies to do that. So that could be it. Is that just the fact that they were losing
train in all sectors, food, water, and men. Like, keep it coming.
Yeah. It's just, I think maybe it's just they had an easier time of supplying themselves in general, really. But
also the way you tell this story, and we're gonna end up finishing it with this next one, but I just want to reiterate, as we've gone through this story, we really do, when we read this stuff, we think of it as, oh, it's this event on a page, but as we can see, this is months and months of horror, absolute horror. I have cried thus far. I have just in my soul, like, I feel despair. And again, I know this has no happy ending. I know that. I know nothing good.
Not really, unfortunately. No, this actually, it obviously ends pretty badly. And
no major gains like this, and nothing good is gonna happen, just so everybody, like, nobody's gonna have this harrowing turnaround at the end. This is body count.
There's no part of this where Malone, like, runs out, pulls out 2 pistols and just, like, kills a bunch of guys and, like, saves the day or whatever. Like, that's not what's going to happen. It's just, it becomes basically, I mean, New Zealand and Australia in particular, our worst military disaster in history. It spawns an entire
no
holiday.
fault of your own. How exciting. Great.
Yeah, and again, I've talked about this in previous episodes, but this is really the time where Australia and New Zealand go, you know what, actually, Britain's not that great. This is, I mean, there are other aspects that contribute to that, but this is really one of the really big and really famous ones. And the kind of the other thing to kind of note about this as well is, you say, it's a months-long thing. This attack takes place in August. The full spoilers, but there's a full evacuation that doesn't occur until October. So they're still there for at least another month or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Even more, couple months.
Yeah.
So, they're still there for a wee while longer yet, before even after this.
Yeah, because we're like mid-August, right?
We're about mid-August. Yeah, I don't know.
So we've got a month, and I'm gonna assume it's
we're
like mid-October or mid to early October. So like a month and a half or more.
Yeah.
Fuck.
So the Wellingtons were relieved from Quins at about the 5th of August. So it was about then. So we're about early to mid-August for this battle.
Oh my God. Not to mention, and everybody's going to remember everything they've gone through thus far. And it's about to get like hard and heavy. It's about to get, as if it wasn't real enough, it's going to get very real. So that being said, man, Thomas, can you spin a yarn, sir?
Thanks. I try my best.
So humble. No, really, it's been absolutely great. It's been just fantastic, man. Go ahead and guys, the last one's coming up. So we're gonna have Thomas plug again everywhere we find, follow, and Patreon. All that jazz.
Yep.
The song and dance by now.
Yeah, so if you do want to follow me for stuff that's it's not quite like this, we're more doing stuff that happens way before this. But if you want to learn more about the history of New Zealand, the history of Aotearoa, New Zealand, you can find me at the History of Aotearoa, New Zealand podcast on all your normal podcast things. You can also find me on Twitter at History Aotearoa. You can also find me on Facebook, History Aotearoa New Zealand podcast. You can also find me on Instagram, History of Aotearoa New Zealand podcast, and Patreon, History of Aotearoa New Zealand podcast. I'll say it one more time. History of Aotearoa New Zealand podcast. Aotearoa spelt Aotearoa. So I can be found on any of those things if you want to listen to me or follow me or ask me questions or anything like that, that's the way to get a hold of me.
My God, stuck it like an Eastern European, gymnast. I've said it a couple times, but damn, that's all 10s from the judges table right there. Kara, do you have anything you would like to add? No. So then again, guys, you know where to find and follow the show. If you are listening to this at this point, you can find us, follow us, yada yada. Same with Thomas. Anywhere that you listen to podcasts, it's going to be at Body Count Pod on both Instagram and Twitter. And then you can follow Kara at Kara DiDemizio on Twitter and Kara.DiDemizio on Instagram, and find and follow me at Jessica B. Manor on Instagram and Twitter. Again, nothing new. So Thomas, as always, man, it's been fantastic. I'm really blown away by the work you have done. Far and away, I love all our guests, but shit, you brought it. I mean, you've made me laugh. You've made me cry. You've made me talk about a grown man digging, latrines over and over again and still crying. So it's been quite a few up and downs. I'm really excited, but not excited, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
To get to
it's mostly
the
downs
last part. Yeah, it's gonna be a lot of downs. A lot of downs. So I'm excited, but not excited. That being said, we'll of course be back at you guys for the finish. And I'm not excited, but excited, like I said. Big finale.
Yeah.
Gonna be interesting, gonna be rough. You're gonna hear me cry. I've already cried. So buckle up, guys, and we will be back at you next week.
Boy.